Today is December 1st, 2019. And Tom, can you state your full name for me?
Emilio Tomas Fernandez.
Okay. And where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Cincinnati. I had a sister who was born in Havana, the other one in Miami, and I was born in Cincinnati. I was an Irish twin to my sister that was born in Miami.
Oh,
so.
okay. And can you talk a little bit about your childhood and what are some memories you have? What was your life like then?
Well, we had a very small family here in Cincinnati. It was just the immediate family, and then my grandparents, which were also came here to Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
So it was pretty standard stuff in terms of just the family unit being small. We did a lot together. We obviously the vacations down to
Mm-hmm.
Miami on a yearly basis was real big for us because back then there was very little Cuban food and other Hispanic food here in the
Mm-hmm.
Cincinnati area, so it was kind of a delight. But just great examples growing up. My parents and my grandparents, but education was really big for our family. So my parents sent my sisters and myself to always a private school. Really just wanted us to get the best opportunities out there. So.
Yeah. Did you live in the city, or where?
Actually, just north of a little suburb of Wyoming, Ohio.
Okay, yeah.
So
I've heard of that. And you were the youngest, right?
I am the baby of the family.
Yes, you're the baby.
And with that comes many burdens and all the pressure. And actually, it's a lot nicer to be the baby of the family.
Yeah, and so you're right. Your parents migrating from Cuba. What sort of traditions did your parents sort of maintain or make sure that you were aware of as a child growing up here in Cincinnati?
Well, I tell you, the one that I dreaded the most, and I laugh about it, was at New Year's we would eat 13 grapes, one for each month, and then the one additional grape. And it's not that I didn't like grapes, but grapes had the seeds back then, and they didn't, so you're spitting out the seeds, you're celebrating, obviously, the New Year, but it was one of those traditions that I was like, not very big into. But a lot of the other traditions of, the family getting together, pretty much existed as other families celebrated here in Cincinnati. We really didn't stand out. I didn't feel like we were that much different than anyone else. I didn't see the differences. We kind of focused on what made us similar.
Yeah. Did you grow up speaking Spanish? Did you speak
I did. It was
Spanish?
actually our first language, but then my sister went to school and she really knew very little English, and my parents thought that was going to be a problem, but then all of a sudden all the parents were calling asking where they could take Spanish lessons. The kids wants to take Spanish lessons because my sister spoke Spanish and they didn't, and so it was kind of a special position that she held. So we started to learn speak Spanish more, and now it's a combination and mixed, and but it was actually quite interesting. One of the things growing up here, there were very little Hispanics in Cincinnati, very few. And so when you speak Spanish, you get on the elevator and make a comment, about the person in the elevator with you, to your mom. And if it was in Spanish, they didn't understand. It was kind of harmless, but
Yeah.
then when we started to speak English and started to vocalize our thoughts, we were 3-4 years old, then it becomes a little bit more uncomfortable when we were when everybody was able to understand. Wow, what a strange hat they're wearing, or something. They're just silly comments that kids would make, but all of a sudden we were making them in English versus Spanish.
And do you have children?
I do. I have 2 boys and a girl.
Okay. And is there anything that you do that is tradition-wise and with the language that you do in your life with them, or?
Well, I think it's just, again, exposure to the family unit. We're, it's. I think the Hispanic culture, it's celebrates the family so much more than other cultures, and respects. My grandparents, they were into their 90s. Both of them died when they were 96. But the whole notion of sending them to a retirement village or someplace else to live, that just didn't make any sense to us. That was kind of completely foreign. That was kind of unique, and I think in respect to our family.
So you were talking about sort of navigating both Spanish and English as a young child, but are there any like phrases or words that stick out to you in Spanish that have sort of stuck with you?
Well, it's funny because some of them are a few that probably I shouldn't mention here. They're a little bit more on the colorful side, but some of them are it's like, oh, you're Cuban, so somebody. Matter of fact, there was a gentleman that worked for my dad, and he went to Chicago, and a lot of the folks started to pick up the same words, colorful words, and they would use them, and somebody would say, well, I knew you must know somebody who's Cuban, and they eventually knew who my dad was. Those are probably the words that you might not want me to repeat.
Yeah. But do you find yourself use Spanish still pretty regularly today, or?
Well, not as much, because my wife is an Irish American, so we don't speak really at home a whole lot. I will tell you one story when we were out, and a number of the families, we'd go to Michigan a lot, and we were on vacation, and all the women and their daughters spent the day, and the men and the boys spent the day, and at the end we got together, a big bonfire, and all the girls were like, oh, hey, today we learned Spanish. I was like, really? Well, who taught you? And they said, oh, Mrs. Fernandez. And I was like, okay, my mom's not here. Oh, they met my wife, okay, and she's teaching you Spanish. I didn't know that she knew any, really, but, and, they repeated some words. And I was like, oh, really? Okay, all right, that's great. And they were in the ranges of 6 to 12. And so we got the evening wrapped up, and I was like, well, Susan, you need to make some phone calls. And she's like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, you taught them certain words which were not very nice words, and they shouldn't be repeating them. And she goes, what do you mean? They're bad words? I'm like, well, I usually say them when I'm driving, or when I break something, or do something really stupid. That's when I say it, And she goes, oh, I didn't know there were bad words. I'm like, yeah, they're not good. So she had to make a few phone calls that night. And fortunately, the kids, towards the end of the vacation, they kind of forgot the words.
Yeah. Luckily for their short-term memory, maybe.
Yes.
That's a funny story. Can you tell us a little bit about your years here going to school, middle school, high school, and sort of your school journey?
Well, it was, I always went to a different school than my sisters up until like 7th grade. Then my parents wanted me to get the same exposure and the same, so that was fun, because all of a sudden I had older sisters, and they were able to, when growing up and being in high school, I'd go to a better party than what my friends would go to. So it was fun for me. But in terms of when I started getting into high school, since both my parents were architects and one of them practiced, one of them didn't, here in the United States, they were very, architecture it is a very difficult profession. It is one of the lowest paying professions out there as compared to engineering or medicine and law and so on. So I was really discouraged. They were like, oh, you don't want to be an architect, you don't want to be an architect. But I always kind of did. But they tried to do everything. My grandfather, being an ophthalmologist, had an optical company, and I would work there during weekends, and so at the age of 14, I actually was the youngest licensed optician in not only the state of Ohio, but in the United States, because it had just gotten to, in the state, to be a licensed profession. And so I was grandfathered in because I was working in that profession. So,
with your grandmother.
They were like, but I hated it. I hated, anything related to it, and had no interest in anything but architecture, but I would not tell my parents. It came to like 11th grade, 12th grade, I was like, oh, geez, I have some bad news, and they were like, oh, did you wreck the car? Did you, break something? What happened? I was like, well, I'm going to architecture school. And they were like, we figured that out a long time ago. But, architecture, was with, here in Cincinnati, again, the obligation of staying close to home versus going, to other schools. I think, again, just because of the family unit and the costs, it's much more expensive to go elsewhere. And UC had one of the best programs around. So it was had a great co-op, which gave you a lot of exposure. So it just became natural to, just stay here in town.
And because you pursued the architecture route, have you felt, how has that impacted your relationship to your family, or to sort of that, because there's a history and a lineage there, right?
Well, I think there is that connection, but there is also, the realization that we're both at times cabezón, and we're set in our ways, and so there were times where we would argue over the direction of the company, or what my focus was what my dad's focus was. So there's many good times, but there was those days where we would just have to agree to disagree, and every once in a while my mom would give me a call, and I knew I was in big trouble. So by that time, but it's all worked out really well.
And can you talk a little bit about what you do here, what you do now?
We are Elevar Elevad is an architectural, engineering, and interior design firm. We do work not only in southwestern Ohio, which is the majority of our work, but we have projects going on right now in Rhode Island, in Georgia, in Michigan, out west we have a project in Colorado. So we're expanding considerably. A lot of our clients are taking us to places that we typically would not have gotten opportunities to practice in.
And when did you start with your own firm?
Well, my dad started the firm in '67.
Okay, so this is a continuation.
It is a continuation of the same firm, but actually I started probably as a co-op in '83, and in '83 my dad and his partner decided to go in different directions, and my dad's partner was responsible for going out and marketing the work. Fortunately, my dad had some strong relationships, so he had one project that he obtained that was was a great project because that lasted for about a year, year and a half. I ended up graduating in '86, so during those co-op times, I was trying to market the firm and had to make sure that there was just enough work to, so we could continue, the company could continue. Because again, my dad's partner, that was his main responsibility. So, but while I co-opt in other places, there's long-lasting relationships that I developed during those other co-ops, and that's what really is wonderful about the UC program is that exposure and those relationships that you build.
So would you consider this safe to say this is a family business then for you?
Oh, it very much is a family business. I remember going in when my mom couldn't pick me up, my dad had to pick me up. I'd go to the office and I'd do silly stuff and pass 2 or 3 hours until I could go home. But it was always doing cleaning the sink out or talking to some of the draft people that were there at the time. It's always fun. And that's one of the things we have today. We are dog friendly, we are kid friendly, so it's a lot of the families that work here, they bring in their family. It's very comfortable to, when they have to, when the kids are not in school, when they have a day off, it's really easy for them just to bring them, and we find activities for them. They could keep entertained here quite well.
So you mentioned that when you were a teenager, you got into optometry sort of because of your work with your grandfather. And outside of architecture, have you worked anywhere else?
Well, it was great because back then, I think minimum wage was like $3.50. And so working for like Burke Marketing Research, doing Spanish interviews was a great job that I had during college, tail end of high school. Again, there were very few Spanish-speaking individuals, so it paid $5 or $5.50, while everybody else, so my peers were getting $3.50. So I was living life big, at that time. So those are the kinds of jobs that is actually a real benefit to speak Spanish.
You mentioned that there was very few Spanish speakers when you were doing this type of work. And I'm curious what kind of work do you do with the Latino community here in Cincinnati, if any? Have you been a part of any organizations or any type do you work regularly with organizations or groups that in some way work with the Latino community or serve the Latino community?
Yeah, we have offices in several cities. Like up in Dayton, I'm a board member of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Between Cincinnati and Dayton, for example, we sponsor 11 scholarships from $1,000 to $5,000 apiece for Latinos interested in pursuing STEM-oriented programs. We headed up the immigration task force for the mayor of Cincinnati because Cincinnati was really behind the times. Dayton and other cities were investing in welcoming programs, recognizing that we needed not only to welcome Latinos but other immigrants, keep the immigrants here. It's amazing when you look at the numbers, how many immigrants start their own businesses and do prosper in their communities and always give back to the communities. I'm also involved with one of the other boards that I'm on is in the state of Ohio. It involves the training. It's Area 7 task team, which helps train not everyone, diverse group of individuals. But here, still in Cincinnati and in the area, in terms of Hispanic-owned businesses, it's really quite limited. We're one of the largest at this point. There's a few out there, but not really not that many. There's maybe a handful in the Cincinnati market that employ over 50 people and do over 10 million in business. There's very few, but it is growing, and part of that responsibility when we're trying to educate those owners is that they have to give back, and whether it's donations, whether it's giving time, or letting your employees give their time, pay them to be able to encourage them to work on these boards. That's important.
So you just mentioned how when you were growing up here, right, there wasn't much of the Latino community happening in Cincinnati, but you mentioned that's really grown. Could you maybe talk about some of those changes that you've seen with the growth of Latinos in the Cincinnati area?
Well, it's interesting because you have to look at the universities. I think a lot of the universities, and that was really when I started realizing the growth, and I'm talking in the late 70s, when I started to see the increase in Hispanic students coming to the area, whether it be Xavier or UC and some of the other universities. They were attracting students from all over. So that was really the first time that I started to say, wow, there is more than just our little pocket of, there is kind of this awareness that Cincinnati is a good place to go. Then really there was kind of an explosion shortly after college, and it really had to do with the lack of the workforce here and needed to be supplemented. I think it started to attract. Cincinnati was not, it's not really the first stop for immigrants. It's usually the second stop. And that's really what we try to concentrate on, is how do you make, make it a better inviting place. And then how do we also maintain, keep the population here that's graduating, that comes to the universities? How do we keep them employed and producing, giving back to the community? That's been a real big focus. Another board that I'm involved with is the Compass Cincinnati, and that includes a lot of a good representation of the immigrants here. But again, it's focused on making it a more welcoming society. How do we connect the resources that are out there? There's a lot of organizations, Mikasa and so on, that produce wonderful results, but there is not a clearinghouse, for example. No one can really just pick up the phone and say, well, where do I get this service, or how do I get my license? If I can't get a license, what alternatives are there? So working with like Catholic Charities to establish some type of universal ID, working with the police department, the various police departments, to make sure that those universal IDs were recognized forms of identification, working with the banks. Those are some of the things we're doing at the Compass Board, working with the banks so that the banks could recognize you're not having to stuff your money under the mattress. You're able to, if you come here to Cincinnati, you're able to open up a bank account. And it's seems a little silly, but it is actually very difficult if you don't have the identification and the know-how and to ask and go to the right places.
So you mentioned that the sort of some of the opportunities available here make Cincinnati a place that Latinos are increasingly wanting to come. What are some other things that you think make it a good place to be?
Well, Cincinnati is, it's exciting because there's the urban core is starting to grow again. People are realizing, especially with the younger generation, I'm amazed how old I am now, but I think the younger generation is starting to appreciate the value of, walkability, and just being closer to the urban core. So I think there's tremendous opportunities here. The cost of living in Cincinnati, the value system like Dan spoke about, the cost of living in terms of homes, or even the rental rates are very competitive to other cities. And here in Cincinnati, you could also be somewhat special. You could think about what separates us, but what makes us unique is can be celebrated in a city like Cincinnati. I think you could be the big fish in a small pond here, and so that's what kind of attracts me to not only Cincinnati but Ohio. Is there's a kind of an awakening of what the Hispanic culture brings to us. Years ago, when talking about minorities, there was only really one minority that was discussed, but all of a sudden now, working with other chambers, for example, Cincinnati has 7 chambers, from the African American chamber to the Hispanic chamber, the Chinese chamber. I mean, there's only about 2 or 3 cities that have more chambers that celebrate each of the cultures. And you have to go to Chicago, you have to go to New York, you have to go to LA to find a greater mix of chambers. But that kind of just tells you where we're aiming to go, what we're wanting to be. When you look at a city, you have to not only see where they are today, but what are they aiming to do. And I think Mayor John Cranley has done an excellent job, and council and others in this area have done a wonderful job in providing opportunities and saying, hey, no, there are more than the minorities. There's a diverse group out there, and we have to celebrate each and every one and attract each and every culture. And so that's kind of what makes Cincinnati special.
Yeah. And you've mentioned, like getting young people who come to school here, maybe Latino or migrant students who come to school here to stay, but what might that sort of future that you talked about, the future of Latino life in Cincinnati, what would that look like for you?
Well, it's interesting because right now, if you, there's a lot of, there's not a whole lot of diversity in the Hispanic culture right now. And I think there is so much out there. There's so many, there's very few Spanish restaurants. There's very few, there's a lot of Mexican restaurants. There was one Cuban restaurant, it closed. There's one restaurant that has a lot of Argentine food. There's a lot of, but in terms of diversity in Hispanic culture, I don't, I think that's really where it would be exciting to see a greater offering and celebration of the differences. I think the Hispanic Chamber here, Alfonso Cornejo, has done a fabulous job. He's a big hero. in terms of what he's done to raise awareness, just the activities, and it's being celebrated and by many of the events you go, and there's such diversity of people that are attending. There's probably only 25% who are Hispanic, but everybody wants. I think everybody realizes we party well. We throw a good party. So come along, and there's a lot of things that the chamber here is doing.
Yeah. Did you go to the gala this year?
Yes, we've gone to the gala. We've had a table there, and that's where we offer some of the scholarships.
Okay.
Are through and presented at the gala.
Mm-hmm.
He's asked me to speak a couple of times, and I have spoken in the past, but it just keeps growing. And it's just like 700 people. It's like, oh, that's too many. I don't want to be in front of that big of a crowd. But Alfonso does a great show.
Mm-hmm. So could you share? We've talked about some of this growth and the excitement, but what are some difficulties that you sort of still perceive for the Latino community here or in your own life?
Well, there's always going to be some negative. There's going to be some challenges. I think one of the challenges has been to recognize Latinos as a minority, as a legitimate minority here, not only in the city but in Ohio. And I think there has been great investment in opening up the doors, greater awareness, but there's still some work to be done. I always worry about the press because you always hear it's the negative stories, but you don't hear the positives. So you hear when there's a shooting or a crime, and that always concerns me because it almost seems like there's a focus that, oh, hey, they're Latinos, and obviously we're in a difficult time. And I can tell you I'm a Republican, but yet I'm very concerned with and involved with immigration issues and so on. I'm very concerned with where we're going. Don't agree with the direction. But really, when it comes down to it, we have to provide opportunities for others, kind of recognizing that all our families who have come here at one time were given opportunities, and it's kind of a payback. It's kind of your obligation to say, okay, how can we make this area a friendlier place? So.
Have you ever felt some of those sort of maybe negative associations or at play in your own life, or?
Oh yeah, sure.
Experiences?
Everybody has stories. I mean, one of my best friends, when his brother got mad at me, we were playing football, and all of a sudden, all the Hispanic slurs, and all of a sudden, he came out. I'm like, really, dude? I've known you for 10 years. I'm best friends with your brother, and you're telling me this? And everybody got real upset with him. But, it was like, wow, is this how you really feel? So, there's those times. But, you have to focus on the good and the positives and move ahead. It's natural for all of us to feel more comfortable with people that are of like kind, history, culture, and so on. But what's exciting is when you start to open the door, your mind and your heart to other cultures, and realization that there's so much out there that's happening, and it's not only the Hispanic culture, it's other cultures that we can learn from, and that's exciting. And just getting people that are different. One of the things I realized is that I didn't want to surround myself with people that are similar to me in many ways, because it's that diversity of, it's the perspective. People with different skill sets. Here you'll find people that are, each have their areas of expertise. Together, we form a great team and are able to. It takes 10 of us to do what my dad was doing by himself. So we have in our office, we have a structural, we have all these. Well, my dad was doing it all himself. Well, I kind of knew that I didn't have the same DNA. There's many days where he kind of probably questioned, well, are you sure you're my son? And I don't, because we're much different in the way we work, but it's just that diversity in the workplace, it's diversity at home that I think is important, and you celebrate it. I will tell you that I went through for many, many years, and I didn't talk about, although it's the name like Fernandez, it's kind of obvious. I go by my middle name, Tom, most of the time, but I try to downplay for many, many years, the fact that I was Hispanic and different and all that. Now, I learned it's like, no, you need to celebrate the differences. Make yourself, we're all each unique, and that's been the exciting. And one piece of advice I would give to anyone is just to, celebrate who you are and make sure that you don't stay quiet, that you participate, that you go outside your comfort zone. Work with as many nonprofits and organizations that make the Cincinnati and Ohio a better place. Don't be bashful.
Great, and this is a related question, but if you were to offer advice to immigrants, right, to Ohio, what would you tell them?
Reach out, go beyond your comfort zone. Make sure that you look and set your goals. It's here. I think it's all achievable. Whether it's a field that you're wanting to get into, or just continue the practice that you have, the field that you're in. I think there's so many opportunities, but it's setting the bar high enough, and then reaching out to others that have done the same thing and learn from them.
And then finally, this question of what does Ohio mean to you? I mean, you growing up here and sort of made a life for yourself in professional ways too, but what does Ohio mean to you? What sort of feelings do you have when you think about your life here?
Ohio's a great place to grow up in. Besides the cloudy skies and the cold and the hot that come, we have there's a lot within a small driving distance. There's so much that is available to explore, to experience. And Ohio does that. It is really at the heart of our country. The Midwest provides so much exposure, opportunities. In Ohio, again, I think it's for the Hispanic community, I think is growing, and that's exciting. And there again, it just offers you an opportunity to make your mark and grow along with the Hispanic community. So I think it's an exciting time to be here.
Yes. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, want us to know, or would like to add to this interview?
No, I will tell you that I've recently been exposed to so many of our city leaders, and looking at how they operate, just sitting back and watching them succeed. I do find that the most important aspect, the reason they are successful, is who they surround themselves with. So if you could surround yourself with people that are setting the bar high, are reaching out, if you could push your peers along, provide opportunities for your peers, where maybe opportunities don't exist. Introduce them to individuals that they might not be able to traditionally get exposure to. I think those are the things that we have to do as a community, is push each other along. Got an email from someone. It was kind of a freaky email because I was at the post office yesterday, and since the holiday, I just thought, well, I got time, I'm going to go pick up the mail at the post office. And I was in line, and there was this woman with her 2 daughters, and they were trying to get their mail because they had just moved, and she was trying to work, and they were in front of me, right in line, and but you could see that there were roadblocks to her, being able to get her mail. Her landlord had just changed the keys to the mailbox, and then the postman didn't have the right keys, so she was without her mail for a week, and they really didn't offer her any solutions. So I said, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you put a hold on your mail, so then on Monday you know that your mail will be here instead of it out on the truck. If it's out on the truck, it's not going to be helpful. But then Monday you can come in and get your mail. And that way, and she was waiting apparently for a piece of paper, a letter about a new job. Well, that evening I got a letter, an email from her daughter, and I was like, it was a little creepy because it was like, how did she know who I was? How did she track me down?
Yeah.
She was just saying, hey, thank you for helping my mom. And, I still thought it was pretty interesting. And, and when I went up to the counter, I obviously said who I was and the company name. And so I guess through the website she found me. But we're here to help each other. So that would be my message is, everybody needs help and everybody appreciates it. So go out there and do it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and
Thank you.
for participating.
Appreciate it.
I'm sorry about it.